In the mid-16th century, Europe was a continent teetering on the edge of chaos. Wars ravaged the land, religion divided nations and families, and plagues swept through cities with merciless ferocity. Amid this turbulence, a man emerged whose name would echo through the corridors of history. A man whose visions would confound scholars, terrify monarchs, and inspire generations of mystics. His name was Michel de Nostredame, known to the world simply as Nostradamus. Born in 1503 in the small town of Saint-Rémy-de-Provence in southern France, Nostradamus was the son of a family that had experienced its share of both misfortune and resilience. He grew up in an age where knowledge was precious and scarce, where the secrets of the stars and the movements of the planets were as critical as the politics of kings. From a young age, he exhibited a curiosity that seemed insatiable. Ancient texts, herbs, the workings of the human body, the patterns of the heavens, all fascinated him. Some say he possessed a mind that could weave together the natural and the supernatural, seeing connections invisible to others. Nostradamus' early life was marked by tragedy. He lost his first wife and children to the plague, an event that would shape his fascination with mortality, destiny, and the fragility of human existence. It was during these years of personal loss and societal upheaval that he began to delve deeply into medicine, astrology, and esoteric studies. He trained as an apothecary and later as a physician, treating the sick during relentless plague outbreaks. Accounts from the time describe him as a healer whose methods blended practical medicine with mystical insight, using herbal remedies alongside an almost uncanny ability to sense the course of disease. Yet, it was not merely his medical skills that made him extraordinary. Nostradamus had a gift or a curse, depending on how one perceives it, for prophecy. From the very first, his predictions were wrapped in layers of mystery, encoded in quatrains, short four-line poems that masked their meaning in symbolic language, historical references, and allegory. He understood the power of ambiguity. By cloaking his visions in coded verses, he could reveal secrets without inviting outright persecution, a delicate balance in a world where the church wielded immense authority and deviation from orthodoxy could mean death. The publication of his first prophecies, Les Prophéties, in 1555, catapulted Nostradamus to fame. At first glance, these works appeared cryptic and almost nonsensical to ordinary readers. But to those attuned to his method, they contained hints of events that would unfold decades, even centuries later. He predicted wars, revolutions, natural disasters, and the rise and fall of powerful leaders. His writings straddled the line between poetry and prediction, creating a literary labyrinth in which truth and metaphor intertwined so seamlessly that deciphering one without the other seemed impossible. Nostradamus' rise to prominence occurred during a period of profound instability in Europe. The continent was still reeling from the aftershocks of the Renaissance, a cultural revival that had rekindled interest in the classical world, in science, art, and humanism. But alongside this intellectual awakening came religious fragmentation. The Protestant Reformation was sweeping across Europe, challenging the authority of the Catholic Church and igniting violent conflicts. In France, where Nostradamus lived, the seeds of civil war were taking root, pitting Catholics against Huguenots in a struggle that would claim thousands of lives over the decades to come. Amid this turbulence, Nostradamus' prophecies were more than curiosity. They were a lens through which people sought to understand an unpredictable world. To the frightened and the hopeful alike, he became a guide, a seer whose words seemed to whisper secrets about the future. Kings and queens, nobles and commoners, all were drawn to his work. Some sought reassurance, others validation, and a few sought to harness his insight for power. Despite his fame, Nostradamus remained an enigmatic figure. Portraits depict him as calm and contemplative, his eyes carrying a weight of knowledge that seemed almost otherworldly. Accounts suggest he was intensely private, a man who valued solitude and reflection. He traveled across Europe, yet wherever he went, his reputation preceded him. Crowds gathered to hear his predictions. Letters poured in from across the continent, seeking his counsel. And yet, for all the attention, he remained elusive, a man more comfortable with the language of stars and symbols than with the political machinations of the courts. What makes Nostradamus truly fascinating is not merely the accuracy of some of his predictions, but the mystique that surrounds him. His life, shrouded in rumor and legend, seems almost as prophetic as his writings. Some claim he was guided by visions and dreams. Others suggest he had access to secret knowledge passed down through esoteric orders. A few even argue that his work was inspired by knowledge of cycles and patterns that modern science is only beginning to understand. In this documentary, we will explore Nostradamus not only as a historical figure, but as a gateway into a world of hidden truths. We will trace his life and his work, unravel the quatrains that have mystified scholars for centuries, and confront the possibility that his prophecies were not merely reflections of his time, but glimpses into the rise of a final world empire. Through his eyes, we will glimpse a world in flux, a civilization on the cusp of transformation, and a vision of the future that continues to captivate, terrify, and inspire. Michel de Nostredame was more than a man. He was a mirror reflecting humanity's deepest fears and grandest ambitions. In the chapters to come, we will journey beyond the veil of history, beyond the surface of quatrains and cryptic poetry, into a story where prophecy, history, and conspiracy converge. Here begins the tale of a seer who dared to look beyond his age, and in doing so, may have seen the path of the world itself. The world Nostradamus inhabited was one of uncertainty, fear, and profound transformation. 16th century Europe was far from the orderly continent many might imagine today. Instead, it was a continent fractured by religious conflict, political intrigue, and the relentless march of disease and famine. To understand Nostradamus' visions, we must first understand the Europe that shaped him, a world on the brink of collapse, yet brimming with possibilities. France, Nostradamus' homeland, was caught in the crossfire of internal divisions and international pressures. The Reformation, which had erupted in neighboring Germany with Martin Luther's bold challenge to the Catholic Church, had ignited a firestorm of religious discord. Across the continent, kingdoms and principalities were forced to choose sides, often violently. France itself became a battleground of ideologies, as Catholic loyalists and Protestant Huguenots clashed in cities, villages, and countryside alike. The seeds of civil war were already taking root, and the people of France lived in a constant state of tension, unsure where loyalty, faith, or survival truly lay. It was also an age of unprecedented upheaval due to disease. The plague, the relentless specter of death, visited communities repeatedly. In some regions, entire villages vanished overnight, leaving the survivors with grief and fear that transcended reason. Nostradamus, trained as a physician and apothecary, confronted this reality daily. He treated the sick, often at great personal risk, navigating a delicate balance between science and superstition. The plague was more than a medical crisis. It was a cultural and spiritual one, forcing people to confront the fragility of life and the seeming randomness of fate. It was the perfect environment for prophecy to flourish. Europe's political landscape was equally volatile. Kingdoms jockeyed for dominance. Alliances were fleeting, and rulers often rose or fell with alarming speed. Spain was expanding its empire across the globe, extracting wealth from the Americas, while England, under Henry VIII and later Elizabeth I, was defining a new national identity. The Ottoman Empire pressed into Europe from the southeast, threatening the traditional balance of power. In this maelstrom, ordinary citizens felt powerless, while rulers relied on advisors, astrologers, and seers to guide decisions that could alter the course of nations. Nostradamus' rising reputation as a prophet offered more than reassurance. It offered a sense of control, a map through the chaos. Intellectual currents of the Renaissance further complicated the picture. Scholars were rediscovering ancient knowledge, from Greek philosophy to Egyptian mysticism, and merging it with contemporary observation. Science, art, and literature were flourishing, yet they coexisted uneasily with superstition and fear. Astrology, in particular, held tremendous sway. It was considered a legitimate science, a tool to read the heavens and predict earthly events. Nostradamus operated at the intersection of this intellectual awakening and the mystical tradition, blending rigorous study of planetary movements with intuitive insight into human behavior. His ability to bridge these worlds made him both respected and feared. This was a world in which ordinary people were accustomed to sudden catastrophe, where kings were deposed overnight, cities burned, and disease could strike without warning. It was also a world obsessed with signs, celestial events, unusual births, comets, eclipses, as portents of what was to come. In such a society, a prophetic voice was not merely entertainment. It was a lifeline. Nostradamus' cryptic quatrains offered a framework to interpret the chaos, a way to impose narrative on a seemingly arbitrary universe. And yet, for all the fear and instability, there was an undercurrent of curiosity and ambition. Merchants expanded trade networks, explorers charted unknown lands, and inventors experimented with new ideas. Europe was not only a continent on the edge of disaster, but also one reaching toward the future, grappling with the tension between destruction and creation. Nostradamus' visions, in their enigmatic brilliance, captured this duality. He did not merely predict doom. He foresaw opportunity, transformation, and the potential for a new order. In this environment, the concept of a final world empire could take root. Nostradamus' audience, kings, commoners, and scholars alike, were primed to consider the possibility of a single, unifying power rising from the chaos. History had shown patterns of consolidation. Empires rose, reached their zenith, and fell, often leaving power vacuums filled by ambitious rulers. In the mid-1500s, with Europe divided and unstable, the idea of an ultimate, controlling power was not just a fantasy. It was a conceivable outcome. It is important to note that Nostradamus did not simply write for the present. He wrote for the future. The Europe he observed was both a source of fear and inspiration, a mirror reflecting human ambition, cruelty, and resilience. Through his quatrains, he distilled this complexity, encoding warnings, insights, and glimpses of a world yet to come. Each verse was layered, capable of revealing new meaning as events unfolded, a testament to the depth of his understanding of human nature and history. As we move further into Nostradamus' work, the backdrop of his Europe becomes essential. The turbulence, the uncertainty, and the constant threat of catastrophe were not just circumstances. They were catalysts, shaping the very visions he would leave behind. By immersing ourselves in the fear, the intrigue, and the intellectual ferment of 16th century Europe, we begin to grasp why his predictions, particularly those hinting at a final world empire, resonate even today. Europe on the brink was a world waiting for a guide, a voice to make sense of chaos. Nostradamus became that voice, bridging the gap between history and prophecy, between knowledge and mysticism. And it is against this backdrop of plague, war, rebellion, and celestial signs that the story of his greatest predictions begins to unfold. Nostradamus' legacy rests not only on what he claimed to have seen, but on how he chose to reveal it. His predictions were not straightforward proclamations. They were not written in plain language for all to understand. Instead, he wrapped his visions in a shroud of mystery, dense poetry, archaic words, and cryptic allusions that seemed to defy simple explanation. At the heart of his work lies a deliberate puzzle, a labyrinth of quatrains that continue to fascinate, frustrate, and confound readers nearly 5 centuries later. His masterwork, Les Prophéties, was first published in 1555. It contained 100 quatrains, 4-line verses written in a peculiar blend of French, Latin, Greek, and even bits of Occident, the local dialect of southern France. Later editions expanded the collection until there were nearly 1,000. Each verse was compact, enigmatic, and brimming with imagery. Nostradamus employed allegory, historical references, astrological symbolism, and at times even deliberate misspellings, as though he intended to hide truths from the unworthy. Why did he choose such a method? Some scholars argue that ambiguity was his shield. In the charged religious atmosphere of his time, a prophecy too direct could be condemned as heresy or sedition. Predicting the fall of a king, for example, could easily be interpreted as treason. To survive, Nostradamus had to mask his intentions. His words were cloaked in enough obscurity to offer plausible deniability, yet rich enough to suggest meaning to those willing to search for it. In this sense, his quatrains were like mirrors, reflecting back whatever the reader expected to see. But others insist his cryptic style was not merely defensive, it was purposeful. To the esoterically inclined, Nostradamus' verses represent a coded system of knowledge, one that reveals its truths only to those initiated into certain mysteries. Throughout history, secret societies and mystical traditions have preserved hidden wisdom through symbolism, numerology, and ciphers. Nostradamus, steeped in astrology and alchemy, may have been following this same path, encoding revelations in a manner accessible only to the discerning. Consider, for example, the frequent use of celestial imagery in his writings. Planets and constellations appear not as scientific notations, but as symbols of kingdoms, leaders, and historical cycles. Mars might represent war, Venus love or alliance, Saturn delay or decay. By embedding his predictions in the language of the heavens, Nostradamus could simultaneously veil his meaning and connect it to cosmic patterns that seem timeless. Those familiar with astrological lore could decode the layers, while outsiders were left bewildered. Equally puzzling is his use of anachronisms and historical allusions. Nostradamus would often reference ancient rulers, Caesar, Hannibal, Cyrus, not to describe their literal return, but to suggest parallels between past and future. In his world, history moved in cycles, and the rise of an emperor in antiquity could foreshadow the rise of a modern tyrant. By framing prophecy through the lens of history, he both obscured and illuminated his meaning. To the untrained eye, these quatrains might seem like riddles. To the adept, they offered a coded forecast of events yet to come. Some researchers believe Nostradamus embedded hidden numerology within his verses. Certain quatrains are grouped or numbered in ways that seem intentional, as though pointing to particular years or astrological ages. Others speculate that his writings follow a concealed calendar, a rhythm of centuries that culminates in the vision of a final world empire. Whether these codes were deliberate or simply the product of creative coincidence remains hotly debated, but the allure of hidden patterns has ensured that scholars, mystics, and conspiracy theorists alike return to his work again and again. Over time, an entire industry of interpretation has grown around Nostradamus' quatrains. Some treat them as puzzles to be cracked, aligning vague phrases with specific historical events. When Napoleon rose to power, interpreters claimed his name and deeds were encoded in Nostradamus lines. When Hitler unleashed war across Europe, scholars again combed the quatrains for confirmation, finding references to Hister and rivers in Germany. Each new calamity, the Great Fire of London, the French Revolution, even the attacks of September 11th, has been traced back to his verses by eager readers. Skeptics argue that this is the genius and the flaw of Nostradamus' style. His cryptic language is so malleable that it can be fitted to almost any event. What seems like prophecy, they contend, is merely the human tendency to find patterns in ambiguity. And yet, the precision with which some quatrains seem to align with reality keeps doubt alive. Is it coincidence? Or is there a genuine code waiting to be unlocked? Some modern researchers have even applied computer algorithms and cryptographic techniques to Nostradamus' quatrains. By scanning for recurring patterns, linguistic anomalies, and hidden sequences, they hope to unearth secrets invisible to the naked eye. A few claim to have found compelling evidence, subtle acrostics, symbolic references, and alignments with astronomical charts that point to specific eras of upheaval. Others dismiss these efforts as little more than forcing meaning onto chaos. Regardless of interpretation, one fact is undeniable. Nostradamus' writings endure precisely because they resist easy explanation. Unlike a simple prediction that either comes true or fails, his quatrains remain perpetually relevant, their meanings shifting with each generation. This quality has allowed them to transcend centuries, adapting to the fears and hopes of whatever age reads them. The allure of hidden codes goes deeper than the text itself. For many, Nostradamus represents a gateway into the esoteric tradition, the idea that beneath the surface of history lies a concealed current of truth accessible only to those who can read the signs. Whether or not Nostradamus intended his quatrains as a cipher, they become a canvas upon which countless seekers project their visions of the future. And here lies the most tantalizing question. Among the veiled warnings, the cryptic imagery, and the coded verses, did Nostradamus hide a vision of the ultimate destiny of humanity, the rise of a final world empire? His method, both poetic and secretive, seems almost designed to conceal such a revelation. To uncover it, we must venture deeper into the quatrains themselves, tracing the subtle threads of meaning that stretch from his time to ours. In the chapters that follow, we will explore the supposed hits and misses of his prophecies, setting the stage for the more ominous and grand predictions. But before we can understand his vision of global unification, we must fully appreciate the labyrinth of language he left behind, a maze of codes and symbols that continues to ensnare the imagination of all who dare to enter. If Nostradamus is remembered today, it is because of the strange accuracy with which many of his quatrains seem to echo later events. Yet his reputation also rests on ambiguity, misinterpretation, and failure. To grasp how his words came to shape centuries of belief, we must look at both sides of the ledger: the celebrated hits that made him legendary, and the misses that critics say expose him as nothing more than a clever poet. From the very first publication of Les Prophéties in 1555, Nostradamus readers were struck by the sense that his verses spoke directly to their world. One early example was a quatrain widely interpreted as foretelling the death of King Henry II of France. The verse spoke of a young lion who would pierce the eye of an older one in single combat. In 1559, during a jousting tournament, King Henry II's helmet was shattered by the lance of Gabriel de Montgomery, and the lance's splinters pierced his eye and skull, leading to his agonizing death. To Nostradamus' contemporaries, this was more than coincidence. It was proof that his visions were genuine. The event was so shocking, and the imagery of the quatrain so vividly aligned with it, that his reputation as a prophet spread like wildfire. Other quatrains seem to foreshadow the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. References to an emperor rising from humble origins in southern Europe, whose conquests would extend across the continent, were quickly linked to Napoleon's astonishing career. Interpreters even found passages that seemed to echo his exile and final downfall. For believers, these predictions confirmed that Nostradamus had seen centuries ahead, foretelling one of history's most dramatic figures. Similarly, during the 20th century, many pointed to Nostradamus as having foreseen the rise of Adolf Hitler. A quatrain spoke of Hister, which some argue was a reference to the Old Latin name for the Danube River region, but which was conveniently similar to Hitler, coupled with imagery of a tyrant emerging in Europe who would unleash war and destruction. Interpreters claimed Nostradamus had foreseen the horrors of the Second World War. Skeptics pointed out that the name was not exact and that details were vague. Yet for millions living through the devastation of the 1940s, the parallels seemed too compelling to ignore. Another off-sided example is the Great Fire of London in 1666. Nostradamus wrote of a burning of the great city in that year, a prophecy that many took as a direct prediction of the inferno that consumed London in September of 1666, destroying thousands of homes and reshaping the city forever. To readers of the time, this was another chilling validation. Even in modern times, Nostradamus verses are called upon in moments of catastrophe. After the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001, many circulated supposed quatrains that seemed to describe two steel birds striking towers in a great city. Although some of these turned out to be fabrications, the public appetite for Nostradamus as a prophet of disaster revealed the depth of his enduring influence. Whenever calamity strikes, people instinctively turn back to his quatrains, searching for hidden foresight. And yet, for every apparent hit, there are countless verses whose meaning remains obscure or whose supposed predictions have failed to materialize. Nostradamus spoke of wars that never came, rulers who never rose, and catastrophes that never occurred. Some quatrains are so vague that they can be applied to almost any event after the fact. For example, a verse describing blood flowing in rivers could apply to any number of wars across centuries. Critics argue that this vagueness is deliberate, a technique to ensure the quatrains always seem relevant, no matter what happens. Skeptics also note that many interpretations are retroactive. Rarely do people point to a quatrain and predict an event before it happens. Instead, after an event occurs, interpreters scour the verses for connections, often stretching meaning to fit. The Hister quatrain is a prime example, likely referencing geography rather than a person, but retroactively applied to Hitler to give the illusion of foresight. In this sense, Nostradamus' accuracy may be less about prophecy and more about the elasticity of language. Moreover, the translations of Nostradamus' work complicate matters. His verses, originally written in 16th century French with admixtures of Latin and Greek, are notoriously difficult to render accurately into modern languages. A single word might carry multiple meanings, and subtle shifts in translation can drastically alter interpretation. What one translator sees as a king of terror, another might render as a tyrant of fear. This slipperiness allows interpreters to mold the text to fit events, further blurring the line between genuine prediction and creative reading. It would be a mistake to dismiss Nostradamus entirely as a fraud or opportunist. Even critics concede that his writings tapped into something profound in the human psyche. The fact that people across centuries and cultures have turned to him in times of crisis suggests that his work resonates on a deeper level than mere coincidence. Perhaps his genius lay not in predicting literal events, but in capturing the archetypal patterns of history, the rise and fall of empires, the cycles of war and peace, the eternal struggle between order and chaos. This duality, hits and misses believers and skeptics, is what makes Nostradamus so enduring. To the faithful, his quatrains are proof of a vision that pierces the veil of time. To the doubtful, they are clever riddles that exploit human tendencies toward pattern recognition and confirmation bias. To both, however, they remain haunting, impossible to fully ignore. In the context of our exploration, the importance of these historical hits and misses is crucial. They form the foundation upon which later, grander interpretations are built. If Nostradamus could foresee the death of a king, the rise of an emperor, or the outbreak of a great fire, then perhaps he also foresaw something even greater, the emergence of a final world empire. If, on the other hand, his predictions are merely the product of chance and vague phrasing, then the notion of a global empire foretold in his quatrains may be nothing more than projection. Either way, the fascination remains. Nostradamus' words refuse to fade into obscurity. Each new generation finds in them reflections of its own fears, its own crises, its own hopes. Whether true prophecy or elaborate puzzle, his quatrains have become part of the cultural DNA of the West, woven into our collective imagination. And so, as we move forward, we carry with us the ambiguity of Section 4. Nostradamus as both prophet and poet, visionary and trickster. His record is mixed, his accuracy debated, but the power of his words undeniable. It is on this foundation of uncertainty that we now approach the heart of the matter. The verses that speak not of kings and battles alone, but of the final destiny of the world itself. From the earliest civilizations, humanity has dreamed of unity and feared it. The notion of a single empire that dominates the globe has haunted both religious prophecy and political imagination. In ancient times, empires like Babylon, Persia, Rome, and China's dynasties aspired to universality, to rule all under heaven. Yet none succeeded in uniting the entire planet. Nostradamus interpreters, however, insist that buried within his enigmatic quatrains lies a chilling prediction, that one day such an empire will emerge, vast, total, and final. This is the vision of the final world empire. To understand the weight of this idea, we must recognize the context of Nostradamus' own age. The 16th century was a time of exploration and upheaval. The New World was being mapped, kingdoms were rising and falling in rapid succession, and Europe was racked by wars of religion. The possibility of a global empire was no longer the stuff of fantasy. Spanish galleons carried silver from the Americas, Portuguese traders reached the East Indies, and the Ottoman Empire pressed against Europe's borders. For a mind like Nostradamus, the possibility that one power might eventually dominate all others was both conceivable and terrifying. In his quatrains, interpreters find repeated references to a great leader who rises from obscurity, unites disparate nations, and forges an empire unlike any before. The language is often symbolic. He writes of the great monarch, of the one who will extend his dominion over earth and sea, and of a force from the east that binds the west. While the verses do not name places or times with precision, believers argue that their tone suggests a global scale. Where earlier prophecies might have applied to Rome or France, these passages speak in terms too sweeping to be confined to a single nation. Consider one quatrain that refers to the peoples of the earth made subject by iron law, their tongues and faiths bent into one accord. To many, this is nothing less than a vision of cultural and political unification under a single ruling order. In an era where globalization is an everyday reality, where technology connects every corner of the planet and institutions of power extend across borders, such imagery feels uncannily relevant. Some interpreters see Nostradamus' final empire not as a political power, but as an ideological or technological dominion. They argue that the monarch he describes may not be a man at all, but rather a system, a new world order enforced through surveillance, digital control, and global governance. In this reading, the prophecy becomes disturbingly modern. The quatrains that once seemed to describe kings and generals are reinterpreted as warnings of corporations, algorithms, and international councils that erode the sovereignty of nations. Others take a more spiritual approach, linking Nostradamus' visions with the apocalyptic traditions of Christianity and Islam. In the Book of Revelation, the rise of a beast-like empire precedes the end of days, a system that rules every tribe, tongue, and nation. Islamic eschatology, too, speaks of a great deceiver, the Dajjal, whose dominion will cover much of the world before divine judgment arrives. Nostradamus' final empire, then, is seen not merely as political or social, but as metaphysical, the climax of human ambition and the prelude to divine intervention. The terrifying aspect of the prophecy is not merely the idea of one empire, but the sense of finality. Nostradamus hints that this empire will not simply rise and fall like Rome or Persia. Instead, it is described as the last consolidation of power, after which comes only collapse, chaos, or renewal. For interpreters, this is why his quatrains continue to draw attention. They seem to describe not just cycles of history, but the endpoint of history itself. What form might this empire take? Across centuries, the candidates have shifted. In the 19th century, some saw the prophecy fulfilled in the ambitions of Napoleon. In the 20th, attention turned to Nazi Germany or Soviet communism, both systems that sought to impose global dominance under their banners. During the Cold War, Interpreters debated whether the empire would emerge from the capitalist West, the communist East, or through their violent confrontation. In our own age, speculation has shifted again. Some argue that the final world empire is being formed not by soldiers, but by economic networks and technological systems. The rise of multinational corporations, international banking institutions, and powerful digital platforms has created a form of governance that transcends borders. Where once kings and generals imposed their will with armies, today the invisible chains of finance, data, and communication bind humanity together. To those who believe in Nostradamus' prophecy, this convergence looks strikingly like the realization of his vision. And yet, there is ambiguity. Nostradamus' quatrains, as always, are elusive. He does not spell out dates, names, or technologies. He offers images, a crowned figure standing before multitudes, a world bound by chains both visible and invisible, an empire whose power stretches across oceans. This ambiguity is both his weakness and his genius. It allows his words to resonate across eras, reshaping themselves to match the fears of each generation. But what makes the notion of a final world empire so compelling is not merely prophecy. It is the human recognition of patterns in history. Again and again, we have seen the same rhythm: fragmentation, consolidation, domination, collapse. Each empire that rises believes it will last forever, and each eventually falls. To imagine one that does not fall, one that completes the cycle and ushers in an entirely new era, is both alluring and terrifying. Nostradamus interpreters argue that this is precisely what his verses suggest: the empire to end all empires. It is here that the mystery deepens. For if Nostradamus did foresee a final world empire, what comes after? Is it an age of peace, where humanity is unified at last under just rule? Or is it an age of oppression, where individuality, faith, and freedom are crushed beneath an all-seeing order? The quatrains themselves offer no clear answer. They speak only of the rise, the consolidation, and the magnitude of power, leaving the aftermath to imagination. Perhaps this is deliberate. Perhaps Nostradamus, like other visionaries of his time, sensed that the future was not fixed but fluid, shaped by choices yet to be made. His warnings of a final empire could thus serve as both prediction and caution, a glimpse of what may come, but also a call to vigilance. And so, we stand at the threshold of interpretation. The final world empire may be read as allegory, as literal prediction, or as archetype. Yet regardless of which path one chooses, the effect is the same. We are left unsettled, haunted by the possibility that history is building toward a singular climax, a consolidation so vast that it leaves no room for alternatives. For centuries, this vision has stirred imaginations, from monarchs and scholars to conspiracy theorists and storytellers. It is a vision that refuses to fade, because it resonates with a question at the heart of human existence. Are we destined to unite under one rule, or are we doomed to repeat the endless cycle of rise and fall? Nostradamus' answer, if one can be found, is hidden still within his verses, waiting for us to uncover, interpret, and perhaps to live. If the idea of a final world empire feels like an ominous myth, then the true fascination begins when we examine the actual words of Nostradamus. His quatrains, short, four-line verses, remain his most enduring legacy. Written in a dense, cryptic French that blends archaic vocabulary with classical references and astrological symbolism, they have challenged readers for centuries. And within their twisted phrasing, many believe, lie unmistakable hints about the rise of a global dominion. To decode these prophecies, we must remember Nostradamus' method. He never wrote in plain speech. He layered meanings through anagrams, wordplay, mythological allusions, and deliberate obfuscation. This technique served two purposes. It protected him from accusations of heresy or sedition, and it allowed his words to remain adaptable across time. A single verse might seem to describe the wars of his century, yet centuries later, readers find uncanny resonance with modern events. Take, for instance, the quatrain often cited as the foundation for the final empire theory in the Great Empire of the Antichrist, / there will be one born near the ancient Rhine, / they will march against Christians and Muslims alike, / their rule will extend beyond earth and sea. Here, interpreters point to several striking details. The empire of the Antichrist suggests not merely a kingdom, but a dominion infused with apocalyptic significance. The reference to the Rhine ties it to Europe, yet the scope, earth and sea, is far larger. To some, this verse foreshadows not only European wars, but the birth of a power that transcends geography, uniting East and West under a single dominion. Another quatrain describes, the great power will bind the world in chains, / not of iron, but of golden strands unseen, / the nations will yield to its order, / though their tongues and gods remain divided. Modern readers cannot help but see in this a metaphor for economic globalization or digital systems of control. Golden strands unseen might symbolize finance, trade, or even data networks that ensnare nations without visible force. In Nostradamus' time, such imagery would have evoked trade and wealth. In ours, it feels eerily predictive of global markets and digital infrastructure. Yet another quatrain speaks of the crown one from the east will rise, / his banners spread across the earth, / the old world will tremble before him, / and the new world will not resist. Interpreters debate endlessly. Is this a reference to the Mongol legacy? To some future Eastern leader? Or perhaps to rising powers in Asia that, centuries after Nostradamus' death, are challenging the dominance of the West? The New World is particularly intriguing, for in Nostradamus' lifetime, the Americas were only beginning to be mapped. Could he have foreseen continents beyond Europe bowing to the sway of a global monarch? Decoding Nostradamus requires patience and imagination, but it also requires a recognition of patterns. Across dozens of quatrains, 3 motifs recur: the rise of a great ruler or power, the unification of nations under this power, a final confrontation or climax that changes the world permanently. Taken individually, these lines could describe Napoleon, Hitler, or any number of conquerors. But collectively, they paint a broader picture, not just of empires past, but of a climactic empire yet to come. Consider this quatrain. The great assembly of nations will convene, / from north to south and east to west, / the law will be one, the tongue imposed, / and the people will live under one mark. For believers in Nostradamus' foresight, this is nothing less than a prophecy of a global government. The assembly of nations echoes our modern United Nations. The law will be one suggests centralized authority, and one mark evokes apocalyptic imagery of enforced identity, chillingly resonant with modern debates about surveillance, biometric systems, and digital IDs. But what did Nostradamus mean by these verses? Skeptics argue that he wrote in broad strokes, vague enough to be applied to anything. They claim that the golden strands could just as easily describe medieval trade routes as global finance, that the crowned one from the east could be the Ottoman sultans rather than some distant future power. To them, the decoding says more about our anxieties than about Nostradamus' insight. And yet, there is a haunting quality to the way his words seem to resurface in relevance. When Napoleon swept across Europe, readers saw the prophecies fulfilled. When Hitler rose, the verses seemed to echo again. Today, as technology and power consolidate, they resonate anew. Could it be that Nostradamus tapped into recurring archetypes of history, patterns so fundamental that they repeat, always leading toward the same end? The task of decoding grows even more intricate when we consider Nostradamus' use of astrological timing. Some quatrains anchor their predictions to celestial alignments, eclipses, planetary conjunctions, or comets. Scholars have attempted to match these with historical and future events, seeking to pin down dates for the rise of this final empire. While no consensus exists, certain periods, notably the early 21st century, are frequently highlighted as aligning with Nostradamus' described patterns. Furthermore, some researchers argue that Nostradamus encoded hidden ciphers within his published works. Anomalies in spelling, numerical sequences, and the structuring of his centuries suggest deliberate concealment. When examined through the lens of numerology or Kabbalistic symbolism, phrases like the Great Monarch or the Empire of the Antichrist take on layered meanings, hinting not just at political power, but at cosmic cycles of order and chaos. What emerges from this decoding is not clarity, but tension. Nostradamus offers no straightforward roadmap, no clear list of events. Instead, he leaves us fragments, poetic shards of a vision glimpsed in the flames of his nightly rituals. These fragments demand interpretation, and in that very act of interpretation, each generation reshapes his words to reflect its fears and hopes. But whether we view his prophecies as deliberate foresight or subconscious archetypes, the consistency is undeniable. The world moves toward unification, and that unification carries both promise and peril. Nostradamus' quatrains, decoded through the centuries, remain a mirror, reflecting back the deepest anxieties of humanity: the loss of freedom, the rise of tyranny, the possibility of global collapse, and the haunting question of whether history has a final act. By examining these quatrains closely, we step closer to the heart of Nostradamus' vision. Was he merely echoing the concerns of his time, dressing them in poetic mysticism? Or was he, as some believe, tapping into a profound foresight, glimpsing the contours of a world empire centuries before its possibility became real? As the decoding continues, one thing is certain: his words are not static relics of the past. They are living verses, shifting in meaning, waiting to be matched with the unfolding events of history. And as the pieces align, they draw us ever closer to the question at the center of this documentary. Did Nostradamus truly predict the rise of the final world empire? And if so, are we living in its shadow today? Among all of Nostradamus' prophecies, few are as chilling or as debated as his references to the Antichrist. Time and again, he writes of a great enemy of humanity, a figure of conquest, deception, and destruction. But Nostradamus does not speak of one Antichrist alone. Instead, across his quatrains, interpreters find mention of three distinct figures, each emerging in a different era, each wreaking havoc on the world. To some, these antichrists form a dark trilogy, a sequence of tyrants whose rise leads inexorably toward the final world empire. The first of these figures is said to have been Napoleon Bonaparte. Nostradamus never names him outright, but his quatrains contain phrases that seem eerily descriptive of Napoleon's meteoric rise. One verse describes an emperor born near Italy, / he will cost the people dear, / they will not see a greater power, / until one rises from the west. Napoleon was born in Corsica, just off the coast of Italy, and went on to crown himself Emperor of France. His wars consumed Europe, drawing in nearly every nation and reshaping the political map of the continent. Interpreters point to Nostradamus' descriptions of the blood of the people flowing near the Rhine and the young lion overcoming the old as metaphors for Napoleon's campaigns against Austria, Prussia, and other monarchies of the Old Order. Napoleon's ambition seemed boundless. He sought to unify Europe under his rule, spreading his legal code and institutions wherever he marched. For a time, it appeared he might succeed, creating a continental empire unlike any since Rome. Yet his empire, like those before him, fell, undone by overreach, war with Britain, and the disastrous invasion of Russia. To Nostradamus' followers, Napoleon was the first Antichrist, the opening act of a greater drama that would continue beyond his lifetime. The second Antichrist, most interpreters agree, was Adolf Hitler. Nostradamus' quatrains contain strange names, jumbled words that seem to point in his direction. One famously mentions Hister, a term skeptics insist refers merely to the Latin name for the Danube River. But believers argue that the resemblance is no coincidence. They point to verses describing the child of poor people in Western Europe, who by his tongue will seduce a great army. Nostradamus writes of a tyrant whose wars bring fire to the sky, iron to the earth, and rivers of blood across Europe. The parallels to Hitler's rise are striking. Born to a modest family in Austria, Hitler used fiery rhetoric to mobilize a nation shattered by war and economic collapse. His armies conquered most of Europe, unleashing destruction on a scale that far surpassed Napoleon's campaigns. Nostradamus even writes of the greater part of the world being in distress, the hungry nations eating in despair, the great black one feeding on them all. To interpreters, this evokes the Nazi hunger policies, the exploitation of conquered lands, and the horror of the Holocaust. If Napoleon sought glory and order, Hitler pursued ideology and annihilation. Both, however, fit the mold of Antichrist figures, charismatic, ruthless, and bent on domination. With Hitler's defeat, many wondered if Nostradamus' prophecy had run its course. Yet his writings speak of 3, not 2. And so attention turned forward toward the shadow of a third Antichrist. Here lies the greatest mystery. Who is the third? Nostradamus never names him directly, but his quatrains offer tantalizing clues. He writes of a young man from the east, who will grow strong in the lands of the rising sun. He will cross the seas with a mighty host, and the world will tremble before his standard. Another verse warns of the great one from Asia, bringing fear to the west, his allies from beyond the sea, together they will march in iron. Interpreters have speculated wildly. During the Cold War, many believed the third Antichrist would be a Soviet leader, perhaps Stalin himself, or a future figure who would launch global war. Others suggested China, envisioning a rising superpower that would one day challenge the West. In the Middle East, some linked Nostradamus' words to Islamic prophecies of the Dajjal, a deceiver who misleads humanity before the end of days. Still others see the third Antichrist not as a single man, but as a system, a technological or ideological empire that binds humanity under its control. Whatever the case, Nostradamus makes clear that the third will be the most destructive of all. He writes of wars that span continents, of fire falling from the sky, of cities turned to ash. The war will be greater than the 2 before. One quatrain says, "It will last 27 years, the people of the earth will suffer, until the great empire is born." Here, the connection to the final world empire is unmistakable. The third Antichrist, according to this interpretation, is not the end but the harbinger, the chaos from which the final empire will arise. The trilogy of Antichrists, thus, serves as both a historical pattern and a dire warning. Napoleon embodied the age of national empires, seeking continental dominance. Hitler embodied the age of ideology, unleashing destruction in pursuit of racial supremacy. The third, whoever or whatever it may be, embodies something larger still, a truly global confrontation that paves the way for a single empire encompassing all nations. Skeptics, of course, dismiss this framework as retroactive fitting. They argue that Nostradamus' verses are too vague, too pliable to be considered predictions. Napoleon and Hitler, they point out, are obvious choices because their wars were so vast and catastrophic. Any ambiguous quatrain could be twisted to apply. As for the third, skeptics argue he remains undefined because the prophecy itself is a projection of fear rather than foresight. And yet, the pattern persists. Human history is littered with conquerors, but few have reshaped the world as profoundly as Napoleon and Hitler. The idea that a third figure, even greater, might emerge is not mere superstition. It is a plausible extension of historical cycles. Empires rise, tyrants emerge, wars escalate. Could Nostradamus have seen this rhythm playing out centuries in advance? For believers, the answer is yes. The 3 Antichrists are not simply men, but markers, signposts on the road to the final empire. Each one brings humanity closer to unification, whether through conquest, ideology, or devastation. Each one, in their own way, tears down the old order and prepares the ground for something new. Napoleon shattered monarchies and spread secular law. Hitler redrew borders and scarred the world with memory of genocide. The third, Nostradamus warns, will unleash chaos on a scale that forces humanity into submission under a single power. And so the prophecy lingers, unresolved. 2 antichrists have come and gone. The third waits, perhaps already among us, perhaps yet to be born. When he arrives, Nostradamus suggests, the world will change forever, and the final world empire will no longer be a prophecy, but a reality. When Nostradamus spoke of the coming of the third Antichrist, his words were wrapped in images of fire, iron, and blood on an unimaginable scale. For centuries, scholars and enthusiasts have debated these ominous quatrains, asking whether they describe wars already past or conflicts yet to come. Many are convinced that his visions were not limited to Napoleon or Hitler, but extended far into the future, to a war so vast and catastrophic that it would reshape civilization itself. This, they argue, is the war of the future, a conflict that paves the way for the final world empire. In his writings, Nostradamus hints at a conflict greater than the 2 before. If the 2 before are taken as the world wars of the 20th century, then the third must logically be a third world war. He speaks of devastation lasting 27 years, of cities turned to dust, of fire falling from the heavens, and iron raining from the skies. These verses have long fueled speculation that Nostradamus foresaw not just traditional armies, but modern weapons of mass destruction. Consider this chilling passage. In the city of God there will be great thunder, / 2 brothers torn apart by chaos, / the fortress will endure, the great leader will succumb, / the third great war will begin when the great city is burning. Though some dismiss this quatrain as misattributed or misinterpreted, others see in it a foreshadowing of modern terrorism and urban destruction. The image of great thunder and the city burning evokes bombings, missiles, or even nuclear fire. Could Nostradamus have glimpsed the horrors of modern warfare centuries before the technology existed? Other quatrains speak of weapons that defy the imagination of the 16th century. He describes fire from the sky, iron birds, and great machines of war moving without horses. To modern ears, these phrases echo airplanes, rockets, and tanks, technologies utterly foreign to Nostradamus' time. Whether by vision, intuition, or uncanny coincidence, his verses seem to describe the mechanized slaughter of wars that would not arrive until centuries later. But it is not only the weapons that matter, it is the scale. Nostradamus repeatedly emphasizes that the war of the future will engulf not one region, but the entire globe. The East will march against the West, he writes, and the West against the East, / the North and South will be drawn into the struggle, / none will be spared, none will remain untouched. This is the language of total war, of nations pulled inexorably into conflict until no corner of the earth is free from its reach. Theories abound as to what might trigger such a war. Some interpreters point to the rise of China as a global power, suggesting that Nostradamus' references to a crowned one from the east and a yellow army crossing the seas could symbolize a confrontation between Asia and the Western world. Others focus on the Middle East, where his verses about fire in the desert and oil fueling the flames of war seem prophetic in light of modern struggles over energy and ideology. Still others believe he foresaw conflict between the Western powers themselves, with economic collapse or political turmoil sparking violence from within. Perhaps most striking are the quatrains that seem to foreshadow nuclear devastation. Nostradamus speaks of the earth trembling in the north, / 2 cities reduced to ashes, / the sun darkened, the air poisoned, / the rivers running with blood. To modern interpreters, this reads like a description of nuclear strikes, the blast, the fallout, the environmental catastrophe. He could not have known of uranium, radiation, or mushroom clouds, yet his imagery fits these horrors with uncanny precision. But the war of the future is not only about destruction. Nostradamus also describes its consequences. He writes of famine spreading across continents, of disease unleashed upon populations, of seas turning red and skies filled with smoke. Some see in this a warning of biological warfare or climate collapse triggered by human conflict. Others interpret it as the inevitable fallout of global war, shattered infrastructure, disrupted agriculture, and suffering on a scale beyond comprehension. It is here that the link to the final world empire becomes clear. According to Nostradamus interpreters, the chaos of this war creates the perfect conditions for a new power to rise. When nations are exhausted, when populations are desperate for order, when destruction has left the world in ruins, the stage is set for a single empire to impose control. He writes, "The people will cry out for peace, / they will yield to the one who brings order, / his chains will be light at first, / but heavy as iron in the end." This is perhaps the most terrifying aspect of Nostradamus' vision. The war itself may be catastrophic, but its aftermath leads not to freedom, but to submission. Humanity, weary of endless destruction, accepts the rule of a single power, the final empire. Thus, the wars of the future are not simply battles for territory or ideology, but the birth pangs of a new world order. Skeptics argue, of course, that these interpretations are little more than projections of our fears. That iron birds could just as easily be comets, the fire from the sky, a metaphor for divine wrath. They insist that Nostradamus wrote in poetic generalities, not technological foresight. Yet the persistence of these images in modern imagination cannot be denied. Each generation, confronted by the specter of global war, sees itself reflected in his words. And in the 21st century, as nuclear weapons remain stockpiled, as artificial intelligence reshapes the tools of conflict, and as tensions simmer between great powers, the relevance of his quatrains feels sharper than ever. Could it be that the wars of the future Nostradamus foresaw are not distant at all, but approaching, unfolding in the very world we inhabit? If so, then his prophecy becomes more than historical curiosity. It becomes a warning, a call to recognize the patterns of history before they consume us. For if Nostradamus is right, the wars of the future are not merely conflicts between nations. They are the crucible in which the final world empire will be forged. And whether that empire brings order or oppression, salvation or enslavement, may depend on choices humanity has yet to make. Throughout history, wars and empires have always seemed to move under the guidance of visible rulers, kings, generals, presidents, and emperors. Yet in the shadows, behind the pageantry of power, whispers persist of hidden hands shaping events, of secret brotherhoods directing the course of nations. Nostradamus, in his cryptic verses, hints again and again at hidden councils, secret chambers, and orders cloaked in silence. For many interpreters, these lines suggest that his prophecies were not only about monarchs and armies, but about the invisible architects of history, the secret societies whose influence might ultimately birth the final world empire. The fascination with secret societies has always run parallel to the study of Nostradamus. Both thrive on symbols, mystery, and the tantalizing possibility of forbidden knowledge. The Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, the Illuminati, the Knights Templar, the Jesuits, each of these groups has been linked at one time or another to the hidden destiny of civilization. Could it be that Nostradamus foresaw their role in the coming empire? One quatrain reads, "The great council hidden from sight, / their words will shape the fate of kings, / the people will see only the hand that signs, / but not the shadows that guided it." To many, this verse perfectly encapsulates the notion of elite influence operating in secrecy. Mainstream historians dismiss it as allegory, perhaps describing royal advisors or papal conclaves. But to the esoteric reader, is an admission that unseen powers would engineer the rise of empires long before they appear on the world stage. The Knights Templar and the Grail legacy among the most enduring candidates for these hidden powers are the Knights Templar. Founded in the 12th century, the Templars became fabulously wealthy and influential before being brutally suppressed in the early 1300s. Yet legends insist that their true treasures, the Holy Grail, sacred relics, and secret knowledge, were hidden away, preserved for a greater plan. Nostradamus, writing 3 centuries after their fall, makes reference to the order betrayed, yet not destroyed. Some interpret this as proof that he believed the Templars' legacy survived, passing quietly into the lodges of Freemasons or into other clandestine networks. According to conspiracy theorists, the Templars' secret wealth and arcane knowledge did not vanish, but flowed underground, becoming the foundation for future movements that sought a new Jerusalem on earth, a world unified under one rule. If Nostradamus glimpsed such a future, the final world empire could be seen not as a spontaneous creation, but as the long-awaited culmination of a hidden plan centuries in the making. The Freemasons and the architecture of power by the time of Nostradamus, the early currents of Freemasonry were already stirring. His verses about builders of stone and secrets in the temples have been read as cryptic references to the stonemason guilds that would later transform into the Masonic order. Freemasonry, with its symbols of the compass and square, its veiled rituals, and its influence across Europe and the Americas, has often been accused of seeking global dominion. Was Nostradamus suggesting that these builders would one day lay the foundations not only of cities and cathedrals, but of a new political and spiritual order? Some interpreters believe so. They point to quatrains in which he describes the new temple of the world and a throne raised higher than the nations, as evidence of a prophecy foretelling Masonic ambitions toward a one-world government. The Illuminati in the shadow of revolution, another group that looms large in this discussion, is the Bavarian Illuminati, founded in 1776. Though established long after Nostradamus' time, his verses about illumined men and the bearers of the light have been retroactively linked to their agenda. The Illuminati, at least in legend, sought to overthrow monarchies, suppress religion, and establish a rational, secular world order. Whether they were extinguished within a decade, as history insists, or merely went underground, as conspiracies claim, remains contested. Those who see Nostradamus as a seer of global conspiracies argue that his references to hidden light and the secret law that rules kings anticipate the rise of such movements. And if the Illuminati, or their ideological descendants, survived into the modern age, could they be preparing the final steps toward the world empire he described? The Vatican and the Jesuit order, no discussion of hidden powers would be complete without the Vatican. Nostradamus, who lived in a time of religious upheaval, frequently wrote about Rome, the papacy, and the intrigues of the Catholic Church. Some of his most cryptic quatrains speak of the black robes who counsel kings and the one with keys who binds nations. Many interpret these as references to the Jesuits, an order founded during his lifetime that became one of the most powerful and controversial institutions in history. The Jesuits were accused of political manipulation, assassination plots, and secret strategies to maintain papal dominance. Whether truth or slander, their reputation as a hidden hand in world affairs has never fully disappeared. If Nostradamus did foresee a final empire, might it be linked not only to secular brotherhoods, but to a religious order whose influence extends across continents? A convergence of powers, perhaps the most compelling idea, is not that Nostradamus singled out one group, but that he foresaw a convergence of many. His language about the Council of Nine, the builders of the temple, and the bearers of hidden light could be taken as fragments of different traditions, Templar, Masonic, Illuminati, Jesuit, interwoven into a single prophecy. In this interpretation, the final world empire is not the creation of one society, but the culmination of centuries of planning by multiple hidden networks whose goals ultimately align. Modern interpretations and fears in the modern age. These ideas have merged into the broader concept of a new world order, a phrase that echoes Nostradamus' own words about a new dominion. Conspiracy theories suggest that world leaders, bankers, and secret councils continue the work begun centuries ago. Nostradamus' vague but haunting descriptions of chains lightly worn and the people welcoming their new master feel disturbingly relevant in a time of global institutions, digital surveillance, and growing centralization of power. Critics, of course, argue that Nostradamus was no more speaking of Freemasons or Illuminati than he was of airplanes or nuclear bombs. They insist that his secret councils were nothing more than metaphors for political intrigue. Yet the allure of connecting his words to the secret societies of history is irresistible, because it makes sense of a pattern we already suspect, that much of human destiny is decided in the shadows, not in the open. The hidden hand behind the empire, whether one believes in Templar treasure, Masonic architects, Jesuit intrigues, or Illuminati agendas, the conclusion is chillingly similar. Nostradamus' final empire will not rise by chance. It will be prepared, designed, and executed by forces most people never see. His prophecy of a council hidden and a master revealed only when the time is ripe suggests that the empire is already in the making, waiting for its appointed hour. Thus, the war of the future and the empire that follows may not be the chaotic accidents of history, but the fulfillment of a secret plan long concealed. If so, the great mystery is not whether Nostradamus foresaw the final empire, but whether those hidden societies saw it too, and have been working across centuries to bring it into being. In the labyrinth of Nostradamus' prophecies, there is perhaps no figure more terrifying, more enigmatic, and more debated than the Antichrist. For centuries, readers of the prophecies have scoured the quatrains in search of this dark ruler, convinced that Nostradamus not only foresaw his rise but provided cryptic clues to his identity. If the final world empire is the culmination of human history, then the Antichrist is its supreme architect, the one who will bind the world under a single banner, not through peace and harmony, but through deception, conquest, and blood. The three Antichrists of Nostradamus' tradition holds that Nostradamus spoke not of one, but of three Antichrists. The first is often identified as Napoleon Bonaparte, the Corsican general whose ambition plunged Europe into war. The second is almost universally believed to be Adolf Hitler, the German dictator whose reign of terror scarred the 20th century. But the most frightening prophecy concerns the third and final Antichrist, the one whose rise would herald not just another empire, but the end of the old world itself. In quatrains scattered across his works, Nostradamus paints a portrait of this ultimate tyrant. He is the king of terror, the man of blood, the master of deceit. He comes not from the shadows of history, but from the stage of global power, rising at a time when humanity is exhausted by war and chaos. One chilling verse reads, "From the east shall come the one clothed in blue. He will cross the seas with fury. His name shall strike fear in all nations. And none shall withstand his hand." Interpreters have debated every line of this quatrain. Does the East mean the Middle East, Asia, or simply a metaphorical rise of the sun? Does the color blue signify a nation, a flag, or perhaps a symbolic robe of authority? Nostradamus never gave names directly, only fragments, hints, riddles that invite speculation. Clues hidden in names in the case of Napoleon and Hitler. Nostradamus' words seemed eerily close. He referred to the first Antichrist as Punay Lauron, an anagram that many believe conceals Napoleon's name. For the second, he used Hister, a river in Austria, but one that resembles Hitler's name almost too perfectly to ignore. So what of the third? Some interpreters claim he will bear a name starting with Mabus. Indeed, Nostradamus mentions this figure explicitly. Mabus will soon die, then will come, / a horrible destruction of people and animals, / then suddenly vengeance will be seen, / hundred, hand, thirst, hunger when the comet shall run. The name Mabus has sparked endless debate. Some insist it is the actual name of the Antichrist, while others argue it marks his forerunner, a key figure whose death ignites the catastrophic war of the future. Candidates for Mabus have ranged from Middle Eastern leaders to Western politicians to prominent figures in modern geopolitics. None has been universally accepted, leaving the mystery unresolved. The Antichrist characteristics beyond names. Nostradamus offers chilling descriptions of the Antichrist's actions. He speaks of a leader who rises during global turmoil, presenting himself as a savior but hiding ruthless ambition. This figure, Nostradamus suggests, will use both war and diplomacy, offering peace while secretly planning conquest. In one verse, he describes, "The false peace will deceive many, / he will sign the pact that binds nations, / but within his heart the fires of conquest burn, / and soon the sword will follow the pen." This imagery is disturbingly familiar in the modern age, where international treaties, summits, and alliances are often forged against backdrops of hidden agendas. The Antichrist of Nostradamus is not merely a military general, but a master of deception, a charismatic leader who seduces the world with promises of stability while preparing the chains of empire. Religious overtones and biblical parallels. The concept of the Antichrist, of course, is not unique to Nostradamus. The Christian tradition, particularly the Book of Revelation, describes a beastly ruler who unites the nations under false peace, wages war against the saints, and marks his followers with a sign of loyalty. Many interpreters believe Nostradamus drew upon these biblical archetypes, merging them into his own visions of the final empire. Yet Nostradamus adds details absent from Scripture. He does not only describe spiritual deception, but geopolitical maneuvering, military strategies, and technological horrors unknown to the ancient prophets. His Antichrist is not a purely religious figure, but a global statesman, warlord, and tyrant combined. A master of technology and control. Some modern readers go further, suggesting that Nostradamus foresaw the Antichrist as a ruler who wields not only armies, but the power of technology. His verses about chains that are not chains, eyes that see across the earth, and voices heard in every land have been interpreted as hints of surveillance systems, satellite communications, and global broadcasting. If so, the Antichrist may not conquer the world through traditional war alone, but through information, propaganda, and control over the digital realm. Nostradamus' vision, then, becomes chillingly relevant in an age of mass surveillance, artificial intelligence, and centralized systems of power. The final empire under his rule, what, then, is the world like under the Antichrist's reign? Nostradamus describes it as a time of initial relief. Wars subside, famine is managed, peace appears to settle. But quickly the mask falls. The empire becomes oppressive, dissent is crushed, and the people find themselves in chains heavier than the chaos that preceded it. One verse proclaims, "The people will beg for peace, / they will bow to the one who offers bread, / but the bread is laced with poison, / and the peace will be war in disguise." This metaphor is stark. Humanity, weary from years of conflict, willingly embraces servitude. The Antichrist is welcomed as a deliverer, only to reveal himself as a destroyer. His empire is one of iron unity, not freedom, of enforced order, not harmony. Who could he be? Speculation about the Antichrist's identity has been relentless. Some point to the Middle East, arguing that Nostradamus, man of the East, and the crescent moon rising point toward an Islamic leader. Others look to Asia, envisioning a rising Chinese emperor. Still others insist he will come from the West, from within the very nations that claim to defend liberty, emerging as a wolf in sheep's clothing. There is also the possibility that Nostradamus did not speak of a single man at all, but of a system, an empire itself functioning as the Antichrist. In this reading, the man of blood is not a person but a structure of control, a political and economic machine that enslaves humanity while appearing to save it. The warning embedded in the prophecy, perhaps the most haunting aspect of Nostradamus' Antichrist, is the sense that his rise is inevitable. None shall withstand his hand, he writes, suggesting that resistance will be crushed, that the final empire is destiny rather than possibility. Yet other verses hint at hope, suggesting that his reign, though terrible, will not last forever, that it too shall fall, consumed by its own corruption. For the moment, however, the shadow of the Antichrist looms large. Whether he is a single ruler, a hidden cabal, or a system of domination, Nostradamus' prophecy reminds us of a sobering truth. The greatest dangers to humanity may come not from invaders, but from leaders we willingly follow. And so, as we contemplate the wars of the future and the secret societies of the past, we arrive at the dark heart of the prophecy, the unveiling of the Antichrist, the figure who will rule the final world empire. His face remains hidden, his name uncertain. But if Nostradamus is correct, his coming is not a matter of if, but when. If Nostradamus' visions of war and tyranny terrify us, it is his insights into how such an empire gains legitimacy that disturb us even more. For he suggests that the final world empire will not rise by force alone. Armies and weapons may bring conquest, but it is belief, the manipulation of faith, prophecy, and spiritual yearning that will keep humanity bound. In quatrains scattered across his prophecies, Nostradamus alludes to religion not as a source of resistance, but as a tool of domination. He describes a throne clothed in light, a priest without holiness, and prophets that speak not from God, but from men. These cryptic words hint that in the age of the final empire, religion will be co-opted, transformed into a pillar of authority that sustains tyranny under the guise of divine will. The ancient union of throne and altar history provides many precedents for this pattern. From the pharaohs of Egypt, who declared themselves gods on earth, to the Roman emperors who demanded worship, rulers have long understood the power of faith. To control belief is to control people's hearts as well as their bodies. Nostradamus, steeped in classical and biblical history, would have known this truth well. In his era, the Catholic Church was the most powerful institution in Europe, its blessings making kings and its excommunications unmaking them. But in his visions of the future, he seems to see a new form of this old alliance, a blending of political empire and religious authority so complete that the people will welcome their chains as sacred duty. One verse reads, "The holy seat shall move, from city to city it will rest, and where it rests, the crown shall be given, by priestly hands to the master of the world." Some interpreters believe this means the religious capital, perhaps Rome, perhaps Jerusalem, or even a future world spiritual center, will be used to legitimize the global ruler. Just as medieval popes crowned emperors, the final empire may crown its leader with sacred ceremony, masking tyranny beneath divine approval. False prophets and manipulated prophecies. Another theme in Nostradamus' quatrains is the rise of false prophets. He warns of spiritual leaders who claim divine inspiration but serve worldly masters. One passage describes, "The prophet will speak not of God, but of kings, his words will bind the nations, and the people, deceived, will think him holy, though his tongue drips with lies." Here we see religion weaponized, not as comfort, but as control. Prophecy itself becomes a propaganda tool, with predictions tailored to justify the empire's conquests and suppress resistance. Ironically, even Nostradamus' own words could be manipulated in such a way. Imagine a world leader citing the prophecies to claim legitimacy, presenting himself as the fulfillment of destiny, the one who brings order after chaos. In a society weary of war, many might accept such claims without question. Thus, prophecy becomes not a warning, but a trap. Messianic expectations. Every culture carries myths of a savior. The return of Christ, the Mahdi in Islam, the Maitreya in Buddhism, the Kalki avatar in Hinduism. These figures are expected to appear at the end of ages, bringing peace and justice. Nostradamus appears to warn that the final empire will exploit these expectations, offering a false messiah who appears to fulfill ancient hopes but delivers oppression instead. He writes, "The awaited one will appear, but he will not be the one they sought. His hand will bring peace for a time. Then blood will flow as never before." This resonates chillingly with Christian warnings of the Antichrist who deceives the world by appearing as a savior. Nostradamus, however, couches it in broader, almost universal terms, suggesting that all faiths may be manipulated simultaneously. Each tradition will be told its Messiah has arrived, and each will yield allegiance to the same ruler. The symbol of unity religious legitimacy often relies on symbols. The cross, the crescent, the lotus, the star. Nostradamus hints at a new symbol that will emerge, one that unites people of every creed. He describes it as the sign that all shall bear, a phrase that some connect to the infamous mark of the beast from Revelation. Whether literal or metaphorical, this mark represents allegiance, an outward sign that individuals belong to the empire, sanctified as if by divine decree. Could this be a physical mark, a digital ID, a unifying emblem flown on banners? Nostradamus gives no specifics, but his imagery suggests a compulsory sign of loyalty cloaked in sacred meaning. The role of the Holy Lands, Jerusalem, Mecca, Rome, these cities have always been spiritual epicenters. Nostradamus' verses about the holy place profaned and the new temple raised upon the ruins of the old suggest that control of sacred geography will be central to the empire's legitimacy. If the final empire can present itself as the guardian of holy sites, the protector of sacred relics, or the fulfiller of apocalyptic expectation, then billions of believers might see its rule not as tyranny, but as the will of God. Here again, we see the blending of conquest and creed, political dominance sanctified through spiritual symbolism. Suppression of dissent, of course. Not all will be deceived. Nostradamus hints at a remnant of resistance. Those who refuse to bow, who see through the lies of false prophets. He describes their fate grimly. Those who will not kneel shall be hunted, their voices silenced, their blood spilled, they will be called traitors to peace, but their truth will endure in secret. This chilling passage suggests that religious dissent will be treated not as faithfulness, but as rebellion. The empire will brand resistors as enemies of peace, using public opinion and holy justification to destroy them. In this way, prophecy itself becomes a weapon. Those who accept it are blessed. Those who reject it are condemned. Technology as the new religion, some modern interpreters argue that Nostradamus may have seen beyond traditional religion into something even more insidious, the rise of technology as faith. His verses about the great eye that sees all and voices heard in every land could describe surveillance and broadcasting, but they may also reflect a future in which humanity places its trust not in gods, but in machines. In such a world, the empire may present technology as salvation, curing disease, ending hunger, connecting all minds. Yet beneath this veneer lies absolute control, the replacement of faith with a digital god that never sleeps. If this interpretation is correct, Nostradamus' warning is not only about priests and prophets, but about our very relationship with power itself. Religion as the empire's foundation ultimately. Nostradamus seems to suggest that the final empire will stand on two pillars: war and belief. Military conquest brings the people to their knees, but religious or prophetic legitimacy keeps them there willingly. The most powerful chains are not forged of iron, but of faith, chains that persuade people to love their bondage as holy service. Thus, the Antichrist's empire may not appear as a tyranny at all, at least not at first. It will appear as the answer to humanity's deepest longings, for peace, for unity, for salvation. And that is why it will be so dangerous. For when oppression is cloaked in sacred robes, when tyranny speaks with the voice of prophecy, resistance becomes not only difficult, but unthinkable. Nostradamus was, above all, an astrologer. Though history often remembers him as a prophet, He considered himself a man of the stars, one who read in their alignments the fates of nations and rulers. His quatrains are filled with celestial imagery, comets, eclipses, planetary conjunctions, descriptions that seem poetic, even mystical, but which often conceal precise astronomical events. To Nostradamus, the heavens were not merely distant lights in the night sky. They were a divine script, a cosmic clock whose movements foretold the rise and fall of empires. If the final world empire was to come, then surely, he reasoned, the stars themselves would herald its arrival. The language of the heavens throughout history, rulers and priests have looked to the sky for omens. In Babylon, astrologers warned kings of coming wars by reading the paths of Venus and Mars. In Rome, comets were thought to announce the death of emperors. Nostradamus inherited this ancient tradition, but he expanded it into a grand cosmic vision, linking not only kings, but the destiny of all humanity to celestial movements. In his Prophecies, he writes, "From the sky shall come a great king of terror, reviving the king of the Mongols, before and after Mars reigns happily." This quatrain, perhaps his most famous, has been interpreted countless ways. Some connect it to comets, others to eclipses, and still others to planetary alignments. But all agree on one point. Nostradamus believed the heavens would mark the coming of a ruler tied to war and empire, a foreshadowing of the final world empire itself. The Great Conjunctions, one of the most important celestial events in Nostradamus' system, was the Great Conjunction, the alignment of Jupiter and Saturn, occurring roughly every 20 years. Astrologers of his time saw these conjunctions as cosmic markers of historical cycles. Major shifts in politics, religion, and culture were believed to follow them. Nostradamus refers repeatedly to the conjunctions of these planets, calling them the great signs in the heavens. He hints that one such alignment will coincide with the rise of a global power, writing, "When Saturn and Jupiter conjoin, a great empire shall be born anew, from the east shall come its strength, and all shall tremble before its sign." Some interpreters link this to recent conjunctions, such as the one in 2020, which occurred at the winter solstice, with the planets appearing closer than they had in centuries. Could this be one of the omens Nostradamus foresaw? To those who believe, the timing seems uncanny, arriving just as the modern world faces unprecedented global upheaval. Comets and fiery signs beyond planets. Nostradamus also speaks of comets, those fiery visitors from the edges of the solar system that have always stirred human imagination. In medieval times, comets were dreaded as omens of plague, war, or the fall of kings. Nostradamus carried this belief forward, writing, "The comet will blaze for 7 nights, and the great empire shall shake, the people will say the heavens burn, and their king shall be struck down." Could this refer to a literal comet? History has recorded such events. In 1997, the Hale-Bopp comet lit the sky for months, inspiring awe and fear. In the future, another comet, perhaps brighter, closer, more terrible, could be seen as a heavenly signal that humanity's destiny is shifting. Others suggest Nostradamus used comet symbolically, representing missiles, bombs, or spacecraft streaking through the sky. A world empire born in the shadow of such fiery signs might see its rule as divinely sanctioned, the heavens themselves bearing witness. Eclipses and the darkening of the sun, another recurring motif in Nostradamus' verses, is the eclipse, the sudden darkening of the sun or moon. For ancient peoples, eclipses were terrifying events, moments when the cosmic order seemed overturned. Nostradamus echoes this fear, writing, "The sun will be darkened, the monster will be seen in full day, the great one will fall, the empire rise, and blood will rain from the sky." Here, eclipse imagery is tied to upheaval and revelation. The monster, seen in full day, could be a metaphor for a leader emerging in the chaos, or perhaps even a literal celestial body, an asteroid or planetary shadow. In modern times, total eclipses are predictable and scientifically explained, yet their symbolism endures. Imagine, in the future, a world already shaken by war or disaster, experiencing a total eclipse that blankets continents in shadow. To those desperate for meaning, such an event might confirm the rise of a prophesied empire. The stars and the Antichrist central to Nostradamus' cosmic warnings is his vision of the Antichrist figure, often linked to planetary alignments. He writes of the star of Mars rising in the east, of a fiery one born beneath Saturn, and of the child of the black sun. These phrases suggest that the birth or rise of this figure will coincide with a specific astrological configuration. Some interpreters have attempted to chart these alignments, proposing that Nostradamus pinpointed exact dates centuries in advance. While interpretations vary, the underlying message is clear. The Antichrist, and by extension the final world empire, will not come unannounced. The stars themselves will proclaim it. The cosmic perspective: why did Nostradamus lean so heavily on celestial imagery? Perhaps he understood that empires rise and fall, but the stars endure. By linking earthly events to the heavens, he gave his prophecies a timeless, universal quality. Whether read in the 16th century, the 21st, or beyond, his verses remain relevant because the sky remains the same. But there's another possibility. Perhaps Nostradamus genuinely believed that cosmic forces influence human affairs, that the alignments of distant planets shape the psychology of nations, the ambitions of rulers, and the destiny of civilizations. If so, then the final world empire is not merely a political development, but a cosmic inevitability written into the very structure of the universe. Modern interpretations in our age, astronomy has replaced astrology as the dominant science of the heavens. Yet the fascination with cosmic omens persists. Solar flares, asteroid near misses, planetary alignments, all make headlines, all spark speculation. Could Nostradamus' imagery of fire in the sky and heavenly kings be describing real astronomical events that we have yet to witness? Some theorists suggest that the rise of a world empire may be linked to a catastrophic celestial event, an asteroid impact, a gamma-ray burst, or the discovery of a threatening object in space. In such a crisis, humanity might unite under a single authority for survival. Thus, the final world empire would not only be foretold by the stars, but born from their danger. The eternal sky as witness, whatever the specific interpretation, one thing is clear. Nostradamus saw the heavens as witnesses to the greatest drama of human history. Comets, eclipses, conjunctions, they're not random, but signals. And in those signals, he read the coming of an empire unlike any before it. For those who believe, the night sky is no longer a silent dome of stars, but a living prophecy. Each celestial event, each flicker of light, could be the herald of destiny, the moment when the final empire draws near. And so humanity continues to look upward, just as Nostradamus did 5 centuries ago, searching the heavens for meaning, for warning, and for the signs of the empire that may already be at hand. Nostradamus' prophecies are scattered, fragmented, and cryptic, yet among them runs one of the most chilling and persistent themes: the appearance of not one, but 3 great enemies of mankind. These figures, known in popular lore as the 3 Antichrists, emerge across centuries, each bringing terror, conquest, and suffering. The first would arise in the East, a conqueror who brought devastation to Europe. The second would come from humble beginnings, yet unleash a world war that left tens of millions dead. And the third, Nostradamus warned, was yet to come, a tyrant of such magnitude that his reign would reshape the entire world, paving the way for the final empire. The idea of 3 antichrists was never explicitly spelled out in a single quatrain. Yet scholars and interpreters have pieced together Nostradamus' verses and identified recurring motifs. The first is usually linked to Napoleon Bonaparte. Nostradamus wrote of a figure born near Italy who would come to enslave much of Europe. He describes armies crossing the Alps, rivers running red, and kingdoms collapsing before him. Napoleon fits this description uncannily well. Rising from obscurity on the island of Corsica, Napoleon built an empire that stretched across Europe, crowned himself emperor in Paris, and plunged the continent into decades of war. For many, this was the first of Nostradamus' antichrists, the archetypal tyrant who believed destiny itself had chosen him. The second figure, identified most often with Adolf Hitler, emerges in Nostradamus' quatrains under the strange and haunting name of Hister. Some skeptics point out that Hister was also the Old Latin name for the lower Danube River, suggesting nothing more than geographical reference. Yet Nostradamus' descriptions of a man rising from the depths of Western Europe, leading armies of steel, and causing rivers of blood have led countless readers to draw the connection to Hitler. Born in Austria, near the Danube itself, Hitler rose from obscurity to become the most infamous dictator in history. His armies swept across Europe just as Nostradamus had described, and his wars brought suffering on an almost unimaginable scale. Whether coincidence or prophecy, the parallel remains one of the most cited pieces of evidence for Nostradamus' predictive powers. If Napoleon was the first Antichrist and Hitler the second, then the third remains shrouded in mystery. Nostradamus offers only fragments, references to the third great one, the infernal prince and the king of terror. He places this figure in a time of global unrest, when nations are fractured and the people cry out for order. Unlike the first two, who were tied to specific regions of Europe, the third seems to be envisioned as a leader whose influence will be global, spanning continents, transcending nations. This, perhaps, is what makes him the most dangerous of all. For if the third Antichrist truly rises, Nostradamus warns, his reign will not be confined to one empire, but will signal the birth of the final world empire itself. The terrifying allure of this prediction lies in its vagueness. Who will this third tyrant be? Some point to the east, recalling Nostradamus' references to the great king of terror from the sky, who revives the spirit of the Mongols. Others point to the Middle East, suggesting a charismatic leader who unites nations under a radical banner. Still others suggest the tyrant will not be tied to geography at all, but to ideology, an individual whose rise is amplified by technology, media, and the global interconnection of the modern age. Unlike Napoleon and Hitler, who wielded armies and cannon, the third Antichrist might wield digital networks, artificial intelligence, and weapons of planetary destruction. What makes the warning even more unsettling is Nostradamus' suggestion that the third Antichrist will not merely wage wars of conquest, but will preside over a transformation of human society itself. He speaks of chains invisible binding the people, of voices of iron commanding obedience, and of a single order ruling beneath heaven. To interpreters, these lines sound eerily like visions of surveillance, mass communication, and authoritarian control. Where Napoleon and Hitler sought dominion over Europe, the third tyrant may seek dominion over the entire planet. The historical parallels with the first two figures add weight to this fear. Napoleon and Hitler were both underestimated at first, dismissed as unlikely to rise so high. Napoleon was a low-born Corsican officer, Hitler a failed artist and soldier. Yet both tapped into a moment of chaos in their nations. Both rallied the masses with visions of glory, and both turned their personal ambition into the destiny of empires. If history is cyclical, as Nostradamus believed, then the third tyrant will likely follow the same path. Rising from obscurity during a time of crisis, capturing the desperation of the people, and turning that desperation into fuel for conquest. But Nostradamus hints at something more. He suggests that the third Antichrist will be greater than the two who came before, not only in power, but in impact. Where Napoleon's wars were vast but localized, and Hitler's wars reached global scale but still ended in defeat, the third may achieve something neither of them could: the establishment of a final world empire. This empire, Nostradamus warns, will not be built overnight, nor will it fall quickly. Instead, it will be a slow tightening of control, a gradual consolidation of power, until humanity awakens to find itself beneath one banner, one law, one tyrant. It is this final tyrant that gives the prophecy its apocalyptic tone. Nostradamus suggests that the reign of the third Antichrist will coincide with natural disasters, cosmic omens, and wars unlike any seen before. He writes of fire falling from the sky, of oceans boiling, and of entire nations swallowed by chaos. Whether literal or symbolic, these images create a vision of an age where humanity teeters on the brink, not only of tyranny, but of annihilation. And yet, he also implies that the end of this empire will come, as all empires must. Whether by rebellion, by divine intervention, or by collapse from within, even the greatest tyrant cannot escape the cycles of history. The fascination with the three antichrists lies not only in their terror, but in their resonance. Napoleon and Hitler are real, their actions recorded in the annals of history. If Nostradamus truly foresaw them, then the third must also be real, waiting somewhere in the wings of history, ready to step onto the stage. And if that third figure ushers in the final world empire, then Nostradamus' prophecies are not distant riddles, but urgent warnings. Humanity, he suggests, stands forever on the edge of repeating its greatest mistakes, destined to follow leaders who promise salvation, only to deliver ruin. And so the quatrains remain cryptic and unsettling. The first tyrant has come and gone. The second has burned the world and fallen, but the third waits. Whether in our lifetime or in some distant future, Nostradamus insists that the final tyrant will rise, and with him, the empire that binds all humanity under a single rule. It is this shadow, stretching from the 16th century into our uncertain present, that makes his vision so haunting. For as long as the third Antichrist remains unnamed, every crisis, every leader, every global upheaval can seem like the prelude to the prophecy. And perhaps that is the greatest power of Nostradamus' words. Not that they reveal the future in certainty, but that they force us to look at our own age and wonder whether the tyrant is already here. If there is one prophecy of Nostradamus that lingers with the most chilling fascination, it is the idea of a final world empire, an age in which all nations, all people, and all lands are bound under a single authority. To some, this vision may seem like the fulfillment of humanity's greatest dream, a world without borders, united in purpose, free of the endless wars that have scarred our history. Yet to others, it is the darkest nightmare imaginable, a tyranny so vast, so total, that no corner of the earth remains untouched by its grip. Nostradamus, as always, spoke in riddles, leaving the interpretation uncertain. But across his verses lies the sense that the final empire will be a paradox, born from both hope and fear, sustained by both unity and oppression. The seeds of such an empire were already visible in Nostradamus' own time. The 16th century was an age of growing empires, when Spain stretched across the oceans, when France sought dominion in Europe, when the Ottoman Turks pressed deep into the heart of the continent. Nostradamus watched as nations clashed for supremacy, each believing it could dominate the world. But he also saw the futility of these efforts. Empires rose, empires fell, yet none endured forever. Perhaps this is why he imagined that the last empire would not simply be another kingdom of conquest, but something altogether different, an empire that claimed not only territory, but the very soul of humanity. In his prophecies, Nostradamus hints at the conditions that would give rise to such a power. He describes an age of unrest, when chaos spreads across continents, when hunger, plague, and conflict drive people to desperation. In such a time, he suggests humanity will cry out for order, for stability, for a leader who can restore balance. The final world empire, then, may not be imposed at first by force, but invited by fear. People weary of division may embrace unity, not realizing until too late the price that unity demands. What form might such an empire take? For centuries, interpreters have speculated. Some imagine a vast political union, born of treaties and international agreements, slowly binding the nations together until sovereignty dissolves. Others see it as a technological empire, not ruled by kings or presidents, but by data, networks, and systems that track and regulate every human life. Still others suggest it will be a religious empire, led by a charismatic figure who claims divine authority and unites humanity under a spiritual banner. The ambiguity of Nostradamus' quatrains allows all these possibilities, and perhaps the truth lies in a mixture of them all. In one quatrain, Nostradamus writes of chains invisible that bind the people, of iron voices that command them, and of a single order beneath the heavens. To modern readers, such words strike with eerie relevance. Invisible chains might mean systems of surveillance, technologies that monitor and restrict without being seen. Iron voices could be the broadcasts of propaganda, or perhaps the algorithms of machines dictating what people see, hear, and believe. The single order beneath the heavens is perhaps the most haunting image of all, a phrase that implies not a single nation, but a planetary dominion, stretching across every continent. And yet, even as Nostradamus described this empire in ominous tones, there is a strange duality. In other verses, he speaks of peace covering the earth, of nations laying down their arms, of a lion and lamb lying side by side. Could it be that the final empire begins as a golden age? A period when humanity finally achieves the unity it has long desired, when hunger and war are conquered, when science and cooperation flourish. If so, then the terror of Nostradamus' vision lies not in its beginning, but in its end, the moment when that unity hardens into tyranny, when the dream of one world becomes the prison of one ruler. History offers glimpses of this paradox. Empires often begin with promises. Rome offered its subjects law and roads, order and prosperity. Yet in return, it demanded obedience, tribute, and sacrifice. Napoleon promised glory, only to deliver devastation. Hitler promised renewal, only to bring destruction. Each tyrant cloaked his ambition in the language of unity, convincing the people that surrendering freedom was the path to greatness. Nostradamus may be warning that the final world empire will follow the same pattern. Promises of peace and security that conceal the iron fist of domination. Some interpreters of Nostradamus link his prophecies of the final empire with biblical visions from the book of Revelation. There, too, is described a global power, a beast that rules every tribe, people, language, and nation. Revelation warns of a mark by which all must buy and sell, a system of control that reaches into every aspect of life. The parallels with Nostradamus' quatrains are striking, and many have argued that his final empire is none other than this apocalyptic kingdom, a reign of the Antichrist destined to dominate the earth. But whether one believes in biblical prophecy or not, the pattern remains hauntingly possible. The world today is more interconnected than in Nostradamus' time. Trade, communication, and technology have woven nations together in ways unimaginable 5 centuries ago. A crisis of global scale, whether war, climate disaster, or celestial event, could easily push humanity into seeking a single authority, one empire to rule in the name of survival. It is here that Nostradamus' prophecy feels less like mysticism and more like foresight, a recognition that human nature, when faced with fear, often chooses order over freedom. The final world empire, then, may not come as a sudden invasion or a dramatic conquest. It may come quietly, step by step, with nations signing away their independence, with people embracing convenience at the cost of liberty, until one day the world awakens to find that the empire has already arrived. Nostradamus' vision forces us to ask, if such a moment came, would we recognize it? Or would we welcome it, believing it to be the salvation we desired? And yet, for all its ominous overtones, there is another interpretation, one that sees in the final empire not doom, but destiny. Perhaps Nostradamus was not warning of tyranny, but describing the inevitable evolution of human civilization. Perhaps a world empire is the only way to end war, to marshal humanity's resources toward survival among the stars, to unify in the face of cosmic threats. Could it be that the final empire is not the Antichrist's prison, but the foundation for humanity's next great leap? The ambiguity remains, unresolved, suspended in mystery. Nostradamus gives us both hope and fear, promise and warning. The final world empire is unity, but also domination, peace, but also chains, destiny, but also doom. In this tension lies the enduring power of his prophecy. We read his words not only as predictions, but as reflections of our own doubts, our own fears, our own longing for meaning in history's chaos. As the world grows smaller, as crises mount, as leaders rise and fall, the shadow of the final empire stretches ever closer. Is it the light of a golden dawn or the darkness of endless night? Nostradamus does not tell us. He only leaves the riddle, daring us to interpret it. And perhaps that is the truest prophecy of all, that the final world empire is not just a future possibility, but a mirror of our present choices. For in every generation, humanity edges closer to the moment when it must decide between unity and freedom, between order and tyranny, between the dream of peace and the nightmare of absolute control. The notion of a final empire is not only a matter of prophecy, but also a deep psychological archetype embedded within the collective imagination of humanity. Nostradamus's quatrains, particularly those that speak of the rise of a singular power dominating the world, draw heavily on a recurring theme found across civilizations. The expectation that history moves in cycles and that each cycle ends with the emergence of an ultimate ruler or empire before collapse resets the world order. This concept has fascinated historians, mystics, and political leaders alike, for it offers both a vision of destiny and a warning of hubris. In understanding Nostradamus's predictions about this last empire, it becomes essential to examine how he described its nature, its power, and the circumstances of its rise, as well as how those images have been interpreted through successive centuries. According to several quatrains, the final empire does not begin as an obvious conqueror, but rather as a system born out of disorder. Nostradamus hints at the great chaos preceding unity, a period in which nations fracture, alliances dissolve, and once dominant powers begin to weaken. In these conditions, a figure or entity emerges that offers restoration of order, stability, and strength. Unlike older empires forged purely by conquest, this one presents itself initially as a savior, even as it lays the groundwork for total domination. The paradox is striking. The final empire rises because people welcome it, not because they resist it. To Nostradamus's readers, this resonates eerily with modern fears of globalization, where central authority is not imposed by brute force alone, but invited through promises of prosperity and peace. The quatrains also describe the leader associated with this empire in terms that are deliberately ambiguous. Sometimes he appears as the king from the east, other times as the great monarch, who comes after a time of immense suffering. Nostradamus's phrasing allows for multiple readings. Was he speaking of a literal monarch, a messianic figure, or a symbolic representation of an entire regime? Interpretations diverge sharply. Some scholars argue this monarch was a spiritual savior who would restore faith across the world, linking Nostradamus to medieval legends of the great king of the last days. Others, however, suggest that Nostradamus was describing an imperial autocrat cloaked in divine language, someone who manipulates religious imagery to consolidate political power. Both readings carry weight, and the ambiguity itself has ensured the prophecy's survival across centuries. The empire's methods of control, too, are shrouded in prophecy. One passage is often cited. In the new city he shall establish his throne, and from it the world shall obey. Readers in the modern age interpret this as a reference to global centers of power. Some see it as Washington, others as Brussels, Beijing, or even a futuristic city yet to be built. The idea of a new city is tantalizing, for it suggests not just a seat of government, but a symbolic capital for a reorganized world order. Just as ancient Rome once became the heartbeat of empire, or Constantinople later carried the torch, this future city becomes the center of administration for humanity itself. Whether this is literal or metaphorical, it paints a chilling picture of consolidation, one central authority dictating the destiny of nations. What is especially striking in Nostradamus's imagery is the blending of technology and authority. Though he could not have understood our modern world in detail, some of his phrases seem uncannily prescient. References to iron birds in the sky, the globe connected by fire, and messages carried faster than lightning are often cited as prophetic glimpses of airplanes, global communication, and the internet. Within the context of the final empire, these tools of connectivity become instruments of control. Power does not rest solely on armies, but on networks, surveillance, and the ability to influence thought itself. In this way, the final empire could be seen less as a territorial conquest and more as a system of complete information dominance, an empire of the mind as much as of land. Of course, Nostradamus was not the only figure to speak of such an empire. His quatrains echo earlier eschatological traditions, particularly those found in the Book of Revelation, the Sibylline oracles, and Islamic prophecies about the Dajjal and the final caliphate. In each of these traditions, the climax of history is marked by a single empire or ruler who claims total dominion before divine intervention ends their reign. Nostradamus seems to have drawn upon this body of lore while filtering it through his own visions. This connection reinforces the idea that he was less predicting in a vacuum and more synthesizing a long tradition of apocalyptic expectation into a cryptic poetic form. Yet, what makes Nostradamus uniquely powerful is that his language allowed the prophecy to stretch far beyond its original context. In the centuries since his writings, interpreters have pointed to Napoleon, Hitler, Stalin, and more recently various world leaders as potential candidates for the emperor of the last age. Each generation finds within the quatrains a mirror of its fears. To a France ravaged by religious wars, Nostradamus's empire was the nightmare of Catholic Spanish dominance. To the readers of the World Wars, it was the Third Reich. To us, in the 21st century, it may be seen as the rise of a technological superstate, whether led by a single nation or by a coalition of elites steering the global economy. Importantly, Nostradamus often paired his vision of the empire with imagery of destruction. He speaks of fire from the sky, the great famine across continents, and the seas rising beyond their bounds. Some have interpreted this as the consequence of global war, others as environmental catastrophe. The link to empire is clear. The final world order may not collapse from outside attack, but from the very scale of its ambition. By controlling everything, it sets itself up for collapse on a planetary scale. The fall of Rome or Babylon becomes a mere prelude compared to the downfall of an empire that stretches across the earth. And yet, the quatrains do not end entirely in despair. There are hints that from the ashes of this empire comes renewal, a rebirth of the human spirit. From the ruins shall arise the children of the stars. One passage is said to suggest, though translation disputes abound, this could be read as a poetic image of a new generation unburdened by tyranny, or even, in more mystical interpretations, as humanity ascending to a higher spiritual state once the empire's chains are broken. It is this duality, dark empire followed by luminous renewal, that gives Nostradamus's prophecy its mythic resonance. Ultimately, Section 15 serves as the threshold of climax in our story. By delving into how Nostradamus described the nature and rise of the final empire, we see not only the terrifying scope of his vision, but also its uncanny relevance to every age of human history. Whether one views these prophecies as literal truths, symbolic warnings, or echoes of older myths, the impact is undeniable. Nostradamus crafted an image of power so vast and ominous that it continues to haunt us, shaping the way we interpret our present and fear our future. As we move into the climactic revelations of the final section, the question remains, is this empire still ahead of us, forming silently in the structures of globalization and technology, or has it already begun, hidden in plain sight, waiting for its moment of total revelation? The climax of Nostradamus' vision arrives not with the simple rise of empire, but with its inevitable confrontation with destiny. His quatrains speak again and again of cycles: rise, dominance, collapse, and renewal. And nowhere is this pattern more vividly expressed than in his allusions to the final empire. For some interpreters, this is the culmination of human history. For others, it is simply another chapter in the endless struggle between order and chaos. Yet what makes this closing stage so compelling is Nostradamus' suggestion that the fate of this empire does not rest entirely in human hands. Instead, he gestures toward forces beyond earthly control, forces divine, cosmic, and apocalyptic, that intervene at the critical moment. The language of prophecy takes on its most dramatic tone here. In one quatrain, Nostradamus wrote, "The great empire shall be at its height, when ruin comes from the heavens." To those reading centuries later, the imagery of destruction raining from above has been linked to everything from aerial bombardments in modern warfare to the specter of nuclear fire, or even a cataclysmic asteroid. Others see in it the language of divine judgment, echoing biblical revelation where Babylon falls by fire from heaven. Whether literal or metaphorical, the message is clear. The final empire is not immune to the universal law of decline. Just as Babylon, Persia, Rome, and all empires before it fell, this one too must collapse, though its fall will be unlike anything the world has ever seen. One of Nostradamus' most haunting lines speaks of a darkness across the earth, lasting 40 years. To a medieval reader, this may have evoked famine, plague, or the wrath of God. To modern interpreters, it conjures visions of nuclear winter, environmental catastrophe, or technological blackout. The connection to empire is again evident. The more global and centralized the system, the more devastating its downfall. If an empire truly spans the globe, its collapse would be synonymous with worldwide crisis. Humanity, unified under one authority, would suffer together as never before. And yet, Nostradamus tempers this imagery with the possibility of renewal. Just as the phoenix rises from ashes, his verses suggest that from the wreckage of empire comes transformation. One disputed quatrain reads, "From the dead city shall arise the new people, guided by stars unseen before." Though the phrasing varies across translations, the implication is unmistakable. Collapse is not the end, but a gateway. This is what gives Nostradamus' prophecy its unique resonance. It is not simply doom-mongering, but a narrative of destruction leading to rebirth. The final empire may perish, but humanity itself, though scarred, endures and evolves. This is the duality that makes the prophecy timeless. On one hand, it warns of tyranny, hubris, and the danger of centralized power that claims control over every nation, every mind, and every resource. On the other, it holds out hope that no empire, no matter how vast, can extinguish the human spirit. In this sense, Nostradamus joins a chorus of prophetic voices across cultures. The Hopi foretelling the emergence of a fifth world, the Norse vision of Ragnarok followed by renewal, and the Christian revelation promising a new heaven and new earth. The message is consistent. After the storm comes clarity, after death comes rebirth. Modern readers cannot help but map these quatrains onto our own anxieties. The structures of globalization, technological surveillance, artificial intelligence, and climate instability all evoke the sense that we may already live in the shadow of this final empire. Some see it in the dominance of superpowers, others in the rise of multinational corporations that wield more influence than governments, still others in the spread of digital infrastructure that connects yet entraps. Whether or not Nostradamus foresaw these specifics, His language provides a mirror in which we project our fears. His final empire may be the culmination of centuries of human ambition, but it also reflects the fragility of such ambition, forever vulnerable to collapse. As the documentary reaches its closing arc, the question shifts from what did Nostradamus predict to what does this prophecy mean for us? If the empire is indeed rising in our time, then are we witnesses to destiny or participants in shaping it? Nostradamus's cryptic verses seem designed not to dictate a fixed future, but to awaken awareness. He leaves space for choice, for human will, for the possibility that knowledge of the prophecy itself might help avert its darkest outcomes. Perhaps this is why his writings remain so alluring. They are both warnings and invitations. The final image we leave with is cinematic and haunting. Imagine a globe. United under one banner, cities linked by technology, skies crisscrossed with aircraft and satellites, information flowing in streams of light, and yet, beneath it all, a deep unease. Nostradamus whispers across centuries that even at its zenith, such power is brittle. The empire will stretch too far, demand too much, and collapse under the weight of its own ambition. Fire from heaven, darkness on earth, famine, and upheaval. Yet out of this chaos, a new dawn. Humanity survives, scarred but not broken, humbled but not extinguished. Thus, Nostradamus's prophecy of the final empire serves not just as a foretelling of doom, but as a meditation on the eternal dance between order and chaos, pride and downfall, destruction and renewal. He challenges us to see history not as a straight line, but as a spiral, where endings are beginnings and empires, no matter how final they seem, are only stages in the greater cycle of human destiny. And so we close, as Nostradamus himself might have wished, not with certainty, but with mystery. The final empire may yet rise. It may already be here, invisible in the structures around us. Whether its fall leads to ruin or renewal depends, perhaps, not only on fate, but on our own choices. In listening to these ancient words, we are reminded of the fragile power of human ambition and the enduring resilience of the human spirit.